Here he is. Okay. Did you want to test him first? Yeah. Sorry, we'll test the audio first.
Bonjour, Monsieur Chefquet.
Bon matin.
Je ferai
Toujours
un
un
petit test de
plaisir.
So I call this meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 81 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Pursuant to the order of reference of Friday, November 25th, 2022, the committee continues consideration of Bill C-20, an act establishing the Public Complaints and Review Commission and amending certain acts and statutory instruments. Today, the committee resumes clause-by-clause consideration. So I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of officials and members. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of the interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they're not in use. Finally, a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. So I will now welcome the officials who are with us once again. Welcome back. They are available for questions regarding the bill, but will not deliver any opening statements. With the Canada Border Services Agency, we have Philippe Tremblay, Acting Director, Public Complaints and External Review Division/Recourse. From the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Joanne Gibb, Senior Director, Strategic Operations and Policy Directorate. We have Leslie McCoy, General Counsel. From the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, we have Randall Coops, Director General, International Border Policy, Martin Lukes, Manager, Border Policy Division, Deidre Pollard-Bussey, Director, Policing Policy. From the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Chief Superintendent Stéphane Drouin, Director General, Workplace Responsibility Branch, Professional Responsibility Sector. Thank you for joining us today. So we are at new clause 96, but I believe Mr. Gahir has a request for UC. Go ahead, sir.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses, obviously, for appearing before the committee again. So I'd like to seek unanimous consent to reopen clauses 41 and 53. I'll start with clause 41 first. This is in relation to, we're good? Yeah, this is in relation to NDP 25. As it was carried out at committee, the amendment modified clause 40 to require complainants to include reasons for the withdrawal of a complaint to the PCRC and RCMP commissioner. As it passed, it creates an imbalance in the complaint process, as this requirement was not added for the complaints related to the CBSA under clause 41.1. We therefore ask unanimous consent for the committee to revisit clause 41 to mirror the requirement carried out under clause 40, so as to ensure that complaints related to the RCMP and the CBSA are treated in the exact same way. And this can be very easily achieved by applying the language under NDP 25 to clause 41.1, which would read as followed. We would basically withdraw subsection 33.2, 41.1, and it would basically, it would read, a complaint may withdraw. Oh, thank you. A complaint may withdraw a complaint. A complainant may withdraw a complaint made under section 33.2 at any time by sending a withdrawal written notice and the reasons for the withdrawal to the Commission or the President. And I think it's being circulated right now.
Thank you. Mr. Julian, did you want to speak before we ask for unanimous consent?
Just to say that this is a consequence of the adoption of the NDP amendment, so I support this UC to clarify it. It makes the language similar in both sections.
So I'm not going to get into debate on this. It's unanimous consent. I just mentioned Peter because he put up his hand right as soon as Mr. Gahir spoke. A very quick moment.
I just wanted to put out there, this committee's had such great goodwill over the last few meetings and congeniality that we will be giving UC on this. We want to make sure we're all working well together. We're looking forward to proceeding today and getting through this, hopefully.
All right, Mr. Motz.
Just one more comment. It's, I guess it's just an example of what happens sometimes when you try to ram through some legislation rather than taking your time to review it. You find these mistakes.
Thank you. So do we have unanimous consent for Mr. Gahir's motion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so we are back to 41. Mr. Gahir has spoken to this. Are we clear on the changes? Yep. Is there any debate on these changes? And we're clear? Okay. All in favor of the changes? Mr. Gahir, go ahead. All in favor of the changes? All opposed? Carried. So we have one more UC request, as I understand it.
Yes, this is clause 53. This is in relation to BQ 14. This was presented as an amendment of concordance to BQ 13, which provides the PCRC discretion rather than a requirement to refuse to deal with a complaint under the conditions set out in clause 52.5 if the complaint could be better dealt with under another provincial or federal procedure. So this could create situations, I think, where if the PCRC has already commenced an investigation and identifies that the issue being investigated would better be addressed by another procedure, for example, human rights concerns arise over the course of their investigation, the Commission would not have the ability to discontinue their own investigation. We don't believe that this was the Bloc's original intent when they introduced BQ 14. So, to better align BQ 14 with what was proposed under BQ 13, the committee should provide the PCRC a discretion to discontinue an investigation into the complaint. And a simple way of achieving this would be to add clause 52.5 under clause 53.1, and it's been circulated, the change in language. I can read it into the record if that's required, but it's been circulated.
Thank you, sir. Are we squared on the changes? Yeah. We'll give the legislative clerk just a minute. And while he's doing that, did you want a quick comment? We're not going to debate this, but please.
In regards to this?
Sure. We'll quickly go into that while this is going on.
So is this something that the department has obviously identified as being an issue that needs correcting? Would that be fair to assume?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so the legislative clerk is clear on this. We're good. Is there any further? No. So it's unanimous consent, right? We have unanimous consent. Did I ask for that already? Do we have unanimous consent to go ahead on this? Okay. Do we have all in favor of the amendments as proposed? Opposed? Carried. I think I did that twice, but we won both times. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kier, and thank you all. Okay. So we are carrying on from, what was it, 93? 96.1. 96.1. Right there, okay. Okay, we're starting, we have a new clause 96.1, which is an NDP 61. Mr. Julian, if you please. Oh, thank
you. This was an amendment recommended by Breaking Barriers to ensure in 96.1 that in any investigation under subsection 1, the RCMP shall disclose to the conduct authority and the member all evidence in paper or electronic form that is under its control and that may be relevant to the investigation. And so I move NDP 61.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Motz.
Just a quick question to the RCMP. Is this not a practice now when you're dealing with an investigation that you disclose to the alleged accused in a complaint all the evidence that's available?
Yes, correct. It's exactly how it proceeds now in the conduct process. So there is disclosure requirements, and all the information is disclosed to the subject member involved.
The department's perspective, or from the commission's perspective, is this clause necessary to add clarity then to the act, or is it something that isn't necessary completely?
We'd offer the view it's not necessary. On 2 counts, one, as my RCMP colleague has pointed out, it's already the practice under the existing provisions of the RCMP Act related to conduct. And 2, once again, it would bring measures of conduct, discipline, investigation, and the actions of the conduct authority into the PCRC scheme rather than keeping that separate in the RCMP scheme where we would suggest it is better placed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor of NDP 61? Opposed? Rejected? Defeated? Defeated. Sorry.
I don't feel rejected, but the amendment was defeated.
That brings us to Clause 97 and BQ 15. Madame Michaud, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, BQ 15.
Thank you. BQ 15 is an amendment that allows third parties to table a complaint. In the amendment, you see non-government organization. I think this should be replaced by third party so that it reflects the other amendments.
Very well. So BQ 15 is moved with the change that non-government organization is changed by third party, whatever the language, organizations. Okay. Any discussion on BQ 15? Mr. Gahir.
Just pointing out that the language, it would be modified in 2 different spots within 45.171 from non-governmental organizations to third party.
Yep. Thank you. And I believe if it was moved in effectively like that as well. Thank you. Any further discussion on BQ 15? Seeing none, all in favor of BQ 15? On division? Yes? Okay.
Sorry, Chris. I'll leave that for you. I'll leave that for you.
No, that's great.
And that brings us to NDP 62. Mr. Julian, if you please.
In the spirit of collaboration, Mr. Chair, and given how cooperative all parties have been today, I am withdrawing NDP 62. We've already had the discussion around the amendment.
Thank you. Shall Clause 97, as amended, carry? On division? Yes? Okay. Okay, so this brings us to a whole bunch of clauses for which there are no amendments. So for Clause 98 to 110, do we have unanimous consent to vote on them as a block? Yes. Yes, we do? Wow. Very well. So on clauses... So clauses 98 through 110, all in favor? On division? Okay. Okay, that brings us to clause 111, block 16. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. BQ 16 improves the definition of a serious incident. This is a request from immigration lawyers in Quebec. According to their experience, some immigrants have experienced prejudice in their undertakings with the border services. And so this would allow serious incident to cover all behavior that has the effect of violating the rights and freedoms of anybody, including detention, for example. And so this is the definition that the Association of Immigration Lawyers proposed.
Any discussion on BQ 16? Mr. Mutz.
I'm just curious from the commission or the department's perspective on any concerns with A1 and A2 here.
We would offer two separate areas of concern in relation to the amendment. The first is that it would create a different definition of serious incident for CBSA than exists for RCMP, which was not the government's intent. The intent was very much to parallel in the new legislation for CBSA the existing definition for the RCMP. The second is in new A2. It would appear to provide that detention or unfounded detention triggers a serious incident which can involve referral to the police of jurisdiction in the case of CBSA. However, detention under CBSA is subject to review by the Immigration and Refugee Board. It is subject to review in certain circumstances by the federal court. So we would not suggest that that is properly a police matter when that occurs.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of Block 16? All opposed? Defeated. But not rejected. Defeated. Shall Clause 111 carry? On division. Shall Clause 112 carry? On division. Shall Clause 113 carry? On division. That brings us to Clause 113.1, CPC 26. Mr. Shipley, if you will.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I will be moving that today. I just need to get to it. I apologize.
You don't need to actually read it.
Yeah,
because
okay.
We have it.
We will be moving this motion.
Thank you. So the chair has a ruling on this one. So the amendment attempts to create a specific pension regime for CBSA employees, which is a new scheme not envisioned in the bill when adopted by the House at second reading, and which would require a royal recommendation. Since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury, or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation. So in the opinion of the chair, the amendment proposes a new scheme which would require a royal recommendation. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible. So no, okay, and so we'd go now to shall Clause 114 carry? On division? So we come to another bunch of amendments. We have clauses 115 to 136, and there are no amendments proposed. Do we have unanimous consent to vote on them as a block? Agreed. Agreed. Very well. All in favor of clauses 115 to 136 on division? Okay. Okay. That brings us to Clause 137 and G9. Mr. Gahir.
Thank you, Chair. So we move that Bill C-20 in Clause 137 be amended by replacing line 5 on page 72 with the following: and Review Commission Act or under regulations made under paragraph 87.0.12 of that act. And basically, this is just a coordinating amendment associated with G8, which was passed earlier, which provides for new regulatory powers. Since there are areas where we've empowered the government to create regulations surrounding information sharing, referral of complaints, joint proceedings, and cooperation between federal review bodies, We're just updating these provisions in the NCR Act to ensure that it's bound by these future regulations.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, shall clause 137 as, sorry, I'm a little ahead. Shall G9 carry? On division? Shall clause 137 as amended carry? On division? Yeah. That brings us to clause 138 and G10. Mr. Gahir.
Great, thank you, Chair. So this is the same as before. G8 is only moved if, sorry, G10 can only be moved if G8 was moved, and it was. And similarly as before, this is just to ensure that the provisions of the NCR Act ensures that it's bound by future regulations as before.
Very well. Thank you. Any discussion on G10? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Shall clause 138 as amended carry? On division? Very well. Shall clause 139 carry? On division? Brings us to clause 140. Mr. Julian, NDP 63.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And given this wonderful collaboration, and it's truly exceptional, I will withdraw NDP 63 because we've already held discussions on the contents of this amendment.
Therefore, shall clause 140 carry? 140. On division? Very well. Brings us to clause 141 and G11. Mr. Gahir.
Great, thank you, Chair. And as G10 and G9, G11 can only be moved if G8 was adopted. And once again, I'll repeat that there are areas where we've empowered the government to create regulations surrounding information sharing, referral of complaints, joint proceedings, and cooperation between federal review bodies. We're updating these provisions of the NCR Act to ensure that it's bound by these future regulations as before.
Great, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, shall G11 carry? On division? Yes? Shall clause 141 carry as amended? On division? Clause 142 and G12. Mr. Gahir.
Great, thank you, Chair. So once again, G12 is similar to G11, G10, and G9, just to ensure that the NCR Act is bound by future regulations.
Thank you. Any discussion on G12? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Shall clause 142 as amended carry? On division? Shall clause 143 carry? On division? Shall clause 144 carry? On division? I'm sorry? Avec décidence. Merci. Clause 145 and NDP 64. Mr. Julian.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Et
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And since this is the last moment before we return to the sections that we had set aside, it's a pleasure to say that we've already discussed the contents of this motion, and therefore I will withdraw NDP 64.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Therefore, shall clause 145 carry? On division? Okay. Shall clause 146 carry? On division? Okay, so this brings us to the clauses that we earlier stood. So clause number 8, we had NDP 5, which we already, with Mr. Julian, withdrew. NDP 6, we have adopted an amendment to remove paragraph E. A second amendment, sub-amendment from MP O'Connell to remove paragraphs B and D was under debate when the clause was stood. If NDP 6 is adopted, CPC 5 and CPC 6 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. Is there any discussion on this clause? I believe so. We were debating Ms. O'Connell's amendment, sub-amendment. Any discussion? Mr. Julian.
Well, the reason why we stood the clause, Mr. Chair, was about the issue around service standards. And I think that was the intent. The sub-amendment basically took out possibility of service standards being in the legislation. So I would speak against the sub-amendment and hope that if we are looking at what was in originally NDP 6 as being potentially too ambitious, that we look at service standards that are more appropriate, or that there's a consensus with around the committee.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll wait just a few minutes while people get up to date on this. Are you square on these minutes?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Chair. So, witnesses, with the comments that Mr. Julian just made, do you have any comment on the amendments as the sub-amendment that was introduced last time that we parked this, and then the comments made by Mr. Julian on how this might impact the intent of this legislation?
So the last time NDP 6 was adopted, there wasn't unforeseen circumstances in that joint service standards with respect to timelines between the PCRC, the CBSA, the RCMP, and now unions were removed from it with respect to complaints. So what this new sub-amendment is doing is reestablishing requirement for the PCRC, the CBSA, and the RCMP with the unions to establish joint service standards around timelines with respect to complaints.
So as I understand it, the sub-amendment would then force the three entities to come together and come up with a service standard that isn't going to be reflected in the Act. Will it be part of a regulation then?
I can't speak to the form that the service standards would take, but it would require them with the unions to establish those service standards.
So is there a timeline of when that expectation would be? I'm just trying to figure out if the whole idea behind timelines was to ensure that complainants who made a complaint had a timely response to whatever complaint that they wanted to make from the organizations who they were complaining to. So is this a normal course of practice, that the three organizations would get together and develop timelines that are going to be amicable for all of them, and then how do we identify them being in the Act so that the public knows, or they can go back and say you didn't meet a timeline if we don't have them codified, so to speak?
So the timelines that we're trying to introduce are the same as timelines that are currently provisions that are currently under the RCMP Act between the CRCC and the RCMP. The establishment of the timelines is not between the three organizations, but between the PCRC and the RCMP, and then the PCRC and the CBSA respectively. With the new amendment introduced by the unions, based on the amendment that was introduced by the NDP, there is also a GIC regulation making power that could be used with respect to the timelines, in case there would be a need to ensure that regulations around those timelines exist.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you have no issue with the sub-amendment then, as the department oversees this?
It fixes an issue that had been introduced at the last amendment. Yeah.
So I've had some clarification from our legislative clerk here. So the upshot of these changes is to remove from NDP 6. We've already removed paragraph E. So the upshot of this is to remove paragraph B and paragraph D.
What?
From NDP 6,
Yes.
the effect of this sub-amendment is to remove paragraph B and paragraph D from NDP 6. Mr. Julian, I can tell you wish to speak.
I don't follow you, actually, Mr. Chair. So is it possible to get a written copy of the sub-amendment? Because this is not, I don't have that.
So, yeah, the sub-amendment is, looks kind of complicated, but the legislative clerk has evaluated it and basically has advised that it amounts to simply removing paragraphs B and D from your amendment. Mr.
So
McDonald.
basically, we're just going back to the original language in the bill?
Well,
With
we've
respect to
removed,
timelines? Is
we
that,
removed Part E, sorry. And then we will be removing if we pass this, removing B and D. But that still leaves Part A of Mr. Julian's amendment, plus C as well. So it's not quite the original language still, right? So, Mr. Julian, are you squared away on this?
Just one final question, Mr. Chair. I understood that the elimination of E was part of the overall sub-amendment, so we have yet to vote on that.
We have already voted on E. So
And
the
then this was the
sub-amendment
second sub-amendment? Thank
is
you.
to basically
Yeah,
get rid of
yeah.
B and C.
Yeah,
Sorry, B and D.
okay. You're right, Mr. Chair. You have an infallible memory, so thank you for
That's not
reminding
true,
me of
but
that.
we'll accept that. Okay. Are we all, oh, wait a minute. We do that. As part of this. It's good. It's good? We don't have to change it? No. Okay. Okay, good. Farewell. I think we're squared away. So all in favor of the sub-amendment? Opposed? Carried. Okay. I believe that finishes Clause 8. Oh, sorry. Thank you. We now we need to adopt NDP 6 as amended. All in favor of NDP 6 as amended? On division? Okay. 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 So that brings us to CPC 5. So can we, is that still got the line conflict? No, there's a line conflict. Okay, so CPC 5 cannot be moved because there still remains a line conflict. Were they?
Sorry. Withdrawn from before.
CPC 6 is withdrawn? Okay. All right. Shall Clause 8 as amended carry on division? That brings us to Clause 28, formerly stood. And so that was under debate. So NDP 17 was moved and was under debate at the time Clause 28 was stood. If NDP 17 is adopted, NDP 18 and BQ 1 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. Mr. Julian, please.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I remember acutely that we have a problem where we've got a number of good amendments, but they contradict each other in a sense. And so what I wanted to propose is we take a few moments just to get a sense of where each party is. The issue being around in clause 28 is the issue of review of specified activities. And this is something that has been raised by a number of organizations, including Amnesty International, and a variety of other organizations, Breaking Barriers. The ability of specified activities to be undertaken, which would be reviews, for example, on systemic racism. So the idea in terms of specified activities in a number of the amendments includes having the request of a committee of the Senate or the House of Commons, of union representatives, of non-governmental organizations. I believe that the language around third party would cover both unions and non-governmental organizations, so I think that is covered off. But the issue that's contained in NDP 17 about a House of Commons committee requesting a review of specified activities, that is something where I think it would be good to hear back from other parties. If the other parties are opposed to that, then the amendment is a lot simpler because we already have third party. I think what we would do is defeat 17 and then move on from there. If there is interest in having a House of Commons committee triggering that review of specified activities, then I think we probably need to suspend for a moment or two and see if we can craft an amendment that both includes third parties but also includes the House of Commons committee. So that's what I wanted to put out. I think a few minutes of discussion will probably save us more time in finalizing that clause.
Okay, so we'll go to Madame Michaud and then Mr. Motz, and then we'll Madame Michaud, allez-y.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. NDP 17 and 18 contradict each other, so the NDP it might be a good idea for the NDP to tell us which applies. We can't adopt BQ1 as a result because the amendment relies on other amendments that have already been passed. So maybe Mr. Julian or the NDP could indicate which changes in 17 or 18 he prefers, because at the moment we can't carry both. So maybe we could take the parts that he prefers in 17 and in 18 and add it to BQ1. Just a thought.
Mr. Motz?
So I'm just kind of curious to know, I know that we have a review of specified activities section in the Act, and I'm just trying to think about what those, I don't remember a definition of that, or I didn't look at the definition of a specified activity. So from the officials, I'm going to ask you first. So with as 17 is currently, do you have a challenge with this? Is there a problem? And even if, as Ms. Michaud has suggested, that you add a third party to the, if you change the wording to maybe list that as a third party, does that change the concerns that could be related to the broadening of this to include other organizations, third parties to come in and start questioning the specified activities of the two agencies?
We would identify concerns. In response to your first questions, Specified activities are what are sometimes called systemic investigations or policy investigations. Recent ones conducted by the Commission would have included things about street checks or strip searches. So these are broader investigations into fields of practice or fields of policy that go beyond just a single complaint. Our concern with the amendment is that Clause 28 as drafted was not intended to limit who could come to the Commission and propose that it would be in the public interest to have a specified activity review undertaken. The Commission could receive that view from any third party, from unions, from some of the groups Mr. Julian mentioned, from parliamentary committees, from the Auditor General, from one of the other officers of Parliament. All of those bodies and organizations could contribute to the body of knowledge that the Commission uses to decide for itself when to undertake a specified activity review. The reason the minister is brought in at 28 is that the minister is otherwise unable to direct the Commission. And the intent is that if the minister is to refer a matter to the Commission, one, that it still be the Commission that decides whether to undertake the review, and two, that the minister do so by exercising a statutory avenue so that no outside observer could conclude that the minister was in some way interfering with the quasi-judicial arm's-length nature of the Commission. I think the concern would extend, if that were broadened out to other groups, that it could put the Commission in a position of answering to groups that are outside the process for decisions that are fully within the Commission's own authority and own mandate to make.
That would include the Parliamentary Standing Committee, potentially.
It very well could. But as it stands now, nothing would stop a Parliamentary Standing Committee from bringing a matter to the attention of the Commission. The Parliamentary Committee does not need a provision in the statute to say to the Commission, hey, we think this is worth a review.
Thank you.
So thank you. So I don't sense we have quite a meeting of minds here on what we're doing with this. Mr. Julian, do you still require a few minutes for us to suspend to sort things out?
Well, I think what I will try to do is start by withdrawing NDP 17. Madame Michaud a posé de bonnes questions, je pense. Je vais retirer.
Ms. Michaud asked the correct question, I think, so I will withdraw NDP 17.
Withdraw? Okay, do we have unanimous consent to withdraw? Very well. It's withdrawn.
Merci à tous mes collègues. C'est vraiment.
Thank you to all my colleagues. The level of collaboration today is remarkable. I love it. So what I would propose is that NDP 18 if Ms. Michaud agrees to add something to BQ1, third party, I think that is the direction that I'm trying to go in, and we could see what the committee thinks about that, because there are those three elements: third parties, unions, and of course House committees. So if we modify NDP 18, I think we'll have all the elements in it, if the committee is in agreement, of course.
Not moving NDP 18 at this time?
I am.
Okay, you're
I
moving.
am moving NDP 18, but opening the door to amendments to NDP 18.
Very well, thank you. Any discussion on NDP 18? Madame Michaud, allez-y.
Je proposerais de...
We could add a sub-amendment to NDP 18 to include BQ1 within it. As we were saying earlier, if NDP 18 is carried, then BQ1 cannot be voted upon. I think it's important. We have agreed to add third-party elsewhere in the bill. So I don't know if it's feasible, but I'd like to hear the view of the officials present on NDP 18 in its current form, if there are any issues that they foresee.
Further discussion on NDP 18? Madame Michaud, could you please clarify where
Pouvez-vous nous clarifier?
language?
Ben, j'ai entendu la position.
Well, I heard the government's position on NDP 18, and so I don't think it's worth adding any sub-amendments to NDP 18.
Is there any further discussion on NDP 18? Seeing none, all in favor of NDP 18? All opposed? With commiseration, it is defeated. Which brings us to brings us to Block 1. Madame Michaud, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Ms. Michaud. Thank you, Mr. Chair. BQ1 allows third parties to table complaints. And in BQ1, it says non-government organization twice, and so I move that we replace that with third party.
Very well, so BQ1 is moved with the change in wording to include third parties. Right, Mr. Julian.
Et je voulais juste demander notre...
I just wanted to ask our witnesses, can they tell us if third parties can include unions?
So I think it would include that.
Dans ce cas-là, Monsieur...
In that case, Mr. Chair, I will vote in favor of BQ1.
Well, thank you. Any further discussion on BQ1? Seeing none, all in favor of BQ1? Opposed? Carried. That brings us to NDP 19.
Et heureusement, Monsieur le Président, je vais retirer...
And good news, I will withdraw NDP 19.
Very well, NDP 19 is withdrawn. That brings us to NDP 19.1. If NDP 19.1 is adopted, BQ2 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. Mr. Julian, if you wish.
Yes, so this is a concern that exists, and this has been raised by the Canadian Council for Refugees, the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group, the Canadian Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP, Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and concerns also raised by the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the National Police Federation. The conditions within Section 28.3 read the following. In order to conduct a review on its own initiative, the Commission must be satisfied that A, sufficient resources exist for conducting the review and the handling of complaints under Part 2 will not be compromised, and B, no other review or inquiry has been undertaken on essentially or substantially the same issue. by a federal or provincial entity. And so the concern around sufficient resources exist is something that has been a matter of concern for a number of organizations, as I've mentioned. What the NDP 19.1 would do is simply take out the sufficient resources exist. Resourcing has been an issue, but it is up to the government to provide adequate resources for the Commission to do its job. And the question of sufficient resources existing or not should not be a reason to not undertake these a review of specified activities, particularly concerns about systemic racism. So 19.1 would simply allow the Commission to consider before conducting a review whether the handling of complaints under Part 2 will be compromised or that any other review or inquiry has been undertaken, and would take out the sufficient resources exist component that has, I think quite rightfully, drawn real concerns about whether the Commission is able to undertake important systemic reviews that many Canadians want to see it do. It should not be a question of resources, and that's why I'm moving 19.1.
Thank you, sir. We go to Mr. Biddle, followed by Mr. Motts. Mr. Biddle, please.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, of the belief that BQ2 and NDP 19.1 are attempting to do something very similar, and we just prefer the language and the drafting in BQ2.
Thank you. Mr. Motts, go ahead.
Well, a couple comments. So Clause 28.3, the way it's written in the Act right now, talks about in order for the Commission to do an investigation of its own initiative, not that somebody has complained about an issue. They have undertaken all by themselves to do something. And I think that's different than what Mr. Julian is suggesting in regards to racism, anti-Semitism, any sort of complaint that someone might have that goes to the Commission. That's a totally different scenario, a totally different path this investigation gets going. And I think, I agree with Mr. Julian suggesting that, if a complaint of that nature was to come to the Commission and they chose not to investigate it because they didn't have enough resources, I think the government needs to certainly give its head a shake and say we have underfunded, a commission to do its job. However, if the Commission on its own accord has chosen to take on an investigation for whatever reason, and I can't think of one offhand, that they would initiate themselves that hasn't already come to the attention of a third party, we've changed the language to reflect, of a third party to come to the Commission and say this is an issue, then because Section 28.3 doesn't apply to the regular scheme, and that is somebody coming in and making a complaint. It only applies to if the Commission on its own initiative decides to conduct an investigation, and these are the criteria for it. I think the Act needs to stay the way it's written, personally. I have a problem with 19.1 and I guess narrowing the focus even more. While I agree that the comments made, as I said previously, by Mr. Julian, for certain types of investigations that come to the Commission, but 28.3 doesn't apply to those sorts of complaints, unless I missed the boat here. And I'll defer to Mr. Coops, who's usually telling me if I missed the boat or not.
No, your observation is correct. It applies to specified activity reviews, not to complaints. It's really a question of the degree of latitude that the committee prefers the chair have at her disposal. When the bill was introduced, the intent was to preserve the primacy of the Commission's complaints mandate and prevent its ability to handle complaints from the public from being eroded or degraded by resources required for specified activity review. That provision exists, as you said, in the bill, in the current act now for the RCMP. So that was carried over. The reason for that is because only the PCRC has a mandate to review and investigate complaints from the public, but there are other bodies available to the Governing Council to conduct systemic activity review-like undertakings. In the meantime, the committee has heard recommendations from other organizations that is no longer desirable. The chair of the commission has recommended that restriction be removed and to allow her to exercise her own judgment and report on it to this place about how she manages the commission's workload and its priorities. We would note that NCIRA, around which much of this machinery has been blueprinted, does not have that provision. So it is really, I think, a question for the committee about the degree of latitude that the chair should enjoy in that space. And my colleagues from the commission may have more to say given the president's, the chairperson's submission on that. Thank you.
So thank you. And I was going to go to you, Ms. Gibb, next on that. I don't recall exactly what the chair of the commission said specific to this issue. If she is asking for latitude that's more reflective in BQ, what is that? BQ, where is it? BQ2. Then I can certainly support BQ2. But if what testimony she gave, and I don't recall it offhand, was that the current language in 28.3 is sufficient for the commission to do their work, then I think it should stay the way it is. So I don't remember exactly what she said.
I don't recall what she said at committee, but the submission was that 28.3A be removed. Because the result of that...
Saying be amended.
Well, she asked that it be removed, but either amendment sort of gets us to the same place, I believe. By including language that says sufficient resources exist for conducting the review and the handling of complaints will not be compromised, what it does is it takes our mandate to do systemic reviews and makes it secondary to the handling of complaints. So the chairperson then doesn't have the discretion to say, okay, certain amount of resources is going to be dedicated to look at this issue more systemically. So we have an ongoing example. There's an ongoing investigation out in BC into the Community Industry Response Group. If anyone watched Fifth Estate on the weekend, they did a piece on it. We have over 500 complaints related to that unit in the RCMP in BC. Those complaints are being investigated, and the conduct of individual members is being examined. Our systemic review is not looking at the individual member conduct. We're looking at the broader issues that seem to, there's, whether there's policy, whether there's training, the command and control. So we won't examine each individual member. Instead, we're looking at it more broadly. We couldn't start that investigation for a couple of years until the commission actually received additional program integrity funding last year. And that's when the systemic review was initiated. Up until that point, there was not sufficient resources to undertake a review of specified activities, which for clarity we call systemic investigations. So that was held off for a while until the funding came around.
So then if I'm hearing and interpreting correctly, then 19.1 and BQ2 should be withdrawn, as well as 28.3 should just be, that should be the amendment. 28.3 is completely removed from the act based on what the chair's asked.
Not B.
Not
I
B.
don't have an issue, there's no, sorry, the chairperson has no issue with B still being there. It's a practice we would do regardless, even if that was removed. We're not looking to reinvestigate something, for example, the Auditor General had already examined.
Okay.
Thank you. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Biddle really put his finger on it, the issue. I was going to move that we vote against NDP 19.1 and vote in favor of BQ2 because the language is clearer and it would also respect the Commission's viewpoint.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on NDP 19.1? Seeing none, all in favor of 19.1? All opposed? Defeated. which brings us to BQ2. Allez-y, madame.
Alors,
So we've just discussed it. I don't think there's much to add. But as I was saying, BQ2 might better respond to the Commission's viewpoint, as Ms. Gibbs just illustrated. So I would invite everyone to vote for it.
Thank you. So just a follow-up to my last conversation about 19.1, does this language better reflect the intent of what we heard from the chair of the commission?
Yes.
Thank you.
I love succinct answers. Mr. Julian, go ahead.
Étant donné que ça enlève la clause
Given that this eliminates the clause about necessary resources, I will support BQ2 because it does have the same thrust as NDP 19.1.
All in favor of BQ2? Opposed? Carried. Therefore, shall clause 28, as amended, carry? On division. This is amazing. Thank you. So, shall the short title carry? On division. Shall the title carry? On division. Shall the bill, as amended, carry? Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House? Shall the committee order a reprint of the bill as amended for the use of the House at report stage? Yes. Therefore, congratulations, everyone. We are finished C20. Thank you to the enormous help of our witnesses and for bearing with us through all this time. We deeply appreciate it. Thank you to our legislative clerks as well, and to our analysts and clerks and everybody, and to the interpreters who have put up with us as well. Mr. Shipley, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just thank you. It was nice getting through this. Thanks to everybody. Just going forward, Chair, could we have maybe a discussion of our schedule for the rest of the week and going forward?
Yes. So my plan at this time is to schedule the trauma-informed counseling for Wednesday. So we will have that portion of the meeting in camera, and there will be a short period before that that's in a public meeting.
That's 1 hour, I believe. Would there be possible on Wednesday to have maybe just a short subcommittee meeting also? We've had lots of motions moved lately and some things brought in, I know, by the block, just so we can kind of have a subcommittee to try and plan going forward. Would that be at all possible?
Well, we actually did a subcommittee meeting, and we still have our direction forward, which is...
Well, I thought that was before, though, the block's motion on the automotive issue.
It is, but we've already modified our plan to do the study on Mr. Bernardo's transfer, followed by C-26. Why don't we talk?
And if we don't want to, that's fine. I just thought maybe that afternoon, if there wasn't a full 2 hours, we could have done a short 30-minute one.
Yeah, very well. Mr. Julian, go ahead.
I would support the idea of having a steering committee meeting with 1 hour. We have 1 hour with the entire committee. I think that makes sense for Wednesday and allows us to schedule better. I did want to thank the witnesses who finally get their lives back now. Thank you very much for being with us over the weeks that this bill has taken. You've added invaluable, important testimony that has helped us shape and improve the bill.
Great. Thank you all. And we'll talk about going forward as in the next couple of days. At this point, I think we have to accept success on this bill and carry forward with a victory. So thank you all, and we are now adjourned.